Hey guys, tonight we're headed back, way back to the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, where the night is warm, the stars are crisp, and someone is hunched over a clay tablet, squinting at cuneiform by lantern light. You're in ancient Mesopotamia now, cradle of civilization, inventor of bureaucracy, and home to some of the oldest libraries known to humankind. The flickering oil lamp casts amber light over rows of mud brick shelves. Somewhere nearby, a temple bell tinks faintly in the wind. You shuffle forward in dusty sandals, the scent of baked clay and old parchment hanging in the air like a sleepy fog. The air's heavy, with that earthy musk you only get from sun-dried tablets, freshly etched with the wisdom of 4,000 years ago. Some of it eternal, some of it, well, let's just say we're not sure the world needed that many barley harvest records. Still, the Mesopotamians were obsessive about writing things down. Inventive, yes. Relaxed, absolutely not. You're here among the scribes now. The elite class of educated recorders who spent their lives carving tiny wedges into clay, making lists of gods' debts and dinner inventories. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive a week in this job. Between the rigid training eye strain and near constant danger of accidentally stepping on your homework, which by the way, was a literal brick, it was a tough gig. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and the local time you're listening. It's always fun to see where you're dreaming from. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly into the archive chamber, tucked behind a ziggurat in a city like Ur or Nippur. A scribe looks up from his tablet with tired eyes. His reed stylus hovers mid-air. He's been recording omens about lunar eclipses. Important stuff. If the moon does something funny, it might mean a king's about to lose a battle or someone's sheep is going to faint. You know vital information. The scribes, mostly young men from elite families, train for years. They start as little kids in adubas or tablet houses where they copy lines over and over. Think Mesopotamian kindergarten. Except instead of finger paints, you're using sharp reeds and chunks of clay. And instead of nap time, there's strict memorization of sign after sign after sign. There are over 600 of them, by the way. Fun. You settle on a bench watching the methodical rhythm of inscription. The scribe wets his stylus and presses tiny wedge-shaped marks into the pliable tablet surface. Each stylus is cut differently, depending on the script's purpose. Wider for bold headlines. Narrower for fine legalese. That's right. Even 4,000 years ago, font choice mattered. In the flickering lamplight, you spot rows of clay tablets drying in a cabinet-like nook. If someone's written something really important, say a copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh, they might even bake the clay to make it permanent. Imagine proofreading an epic, then baking it like a casserole. No pressure. You trail your fingers along a low shelf, careful not to knock anything over. These shelves are just mud brick slabs inset into the wall, divided into little square pigeonholes. Each one holds a tablet or two. There are no title spines, no colorful covers, just neat impressions, and occasionally a reed tag with a quick descriptor. Silo ledger. Year of the plague or prayers for stomach troubles. Because even in ancient times, stomach problems were a serious issue. A sleepy breeze slips through a cracked window slit and a nearby candle gutters. The scribe sighs and stretches his arms. It's been a long day. He's been transcribing tax records for barley shipments from Lagash. And here's where it gets a little quirky sometimes. Scribes doodled in the margins. Cat's gods jokes anything to pass the time. Historians still argue whether some strange symbols are satire schoolboy rebellion or just very bad spelling. You lean closer to a broken tablet. The scribe sees your interest and shrugs. "Courier dropped it," he mutters in Akkadian. "He tripped over a goat." Typical. Time moves slowly here. Between each word is a breath. Between each tablet, a pause. Everything feels deliberate, grounded. There's no rush, no email alerts. Just the whisper of clay against reed and the slow, rhythmic beat of language taking form. And even though these libraries weren't public in any modern sense, most were temple or palace. Controlled, the scribes knew they were preserving something vital. The entire bureaucracy of empire, the scaffolding of religion, even a decent recipe for beer. It's all here pressed into tablets stored in these cool, silent rooms. Eventually, the scribe packs up for the night. He places his tablet gently on a low shelf and drapes a thin cloth over the unbaked pieces. Outside, the city hums with lullabies and marketplace gossip. You step out into the warm night, the scent of river mud and date palms in the air, and glance back at the doorway. Behind those walls, someone just finished preserving a fraction of human history, one wedge mark at a time. You wake, or perhaps never fully fell asleep, still wandering the corridors of Mesopotamia's libraries. But something tugs at your curiosity now. Not the who or the what, but the how. How exactly did these ancient record keepers store all that knowledge without bookshelves, paperbacks, or Dewey Decimals? You slip past a temple courtyard, stepping into the cool interior of a lesser-known archive, tucked beside the priest's quarters. There's no scent of old paper here. Instead, the air is tinged with dry earth ash from incense and the subtle metallic tang of river silt. All around you are squat shelves and bins, filled with clay rectangles, flat oblong, sometimes warped in the heat. Each one is a tiny monument to the Mesopotamians' dedication to recording life. You kneel beside a stack and lift one gingerly. It's surprisingly heavy, denser than you'd think for something that once functioned as their version of a notepad. Unlike paper, which invites breezy, carefree writing, and equally breezy, crumpling clay demands commitment. You press in, you dry it sometimes, you bake it, and if you mess up, it's not as simple as just hit backspace. Why clay? Because in this flood-prone region, papyrus didn't last, parchment was too precious, and wood was hard to carve in detail. Clay was abundant, reusable to a point, and wonderfully democratic. Anyone trained in cuneiform could make a tablet. But there's a catch: you had to get it just wet enough to be pliable, not mushy. It's like Goldilocks porridge, but for mud. Some tablets were sun-dried. Others, particularly legal contracts or royal proclamations, were fired in a kiln. That made them hard as stone and nearly indestructible. In a twist of historical irony, fires that destroyed entire cities often preserved libraries. Your dinner may have burned, but the tax records survived. You wander toward the writing table and spot a large flat surface used to knead fresh clay into smooth rectangles. Think of it like prepping dough for a very boring pizza. A stylus made from split reed lies nearby, the tip chiseled into the shape of a wedge. Every flick and press leaves behind a tiny triangle which combined form cuneiform, the script of bureaucrats, poets, and prophets. This writing system wasn't alphabetical. It was mostly syllabic and logographic, which means you had to memorize hundreds of signs. Some stood for entire words, others for sounds. Imagine texting, but with emojis that could mean wheat priest or 5 goats arguing in a courtyard. Scribes knew them all, or claimed to. You trace your finger along one edge of the tablet. There's a deep groove across the middle, an editing line perhaps. Or maybe a division between 2 legal clauses. Some tablets were scored like this to break into sections, much like modern paragraphs. You even find corner marked subtle indicators of sequencing, part 1 of 3, etched long before humans invented the binge watch. In the corner of the room stands a shelf, or rather a layered stack of mud brick cubbies. Inside each one are tablets wrapped in protective rush mats. Some even have tiny clay tags attached with a bit of twine etched with brief summaries. It's primitive metadata, and it worked unless the twine broke. Which it did. Often. You stumble across a curious tablet shaped like a small pillow. It fits neatly in your palm. This one's a receipt. A short list of dates and goods exchanged with a signature carved into the bottom. Not in ink, of course, but in the stylized glyph of the signing party. Some even had cylinder seals, tiny carved stone rollers that imprinted unique images onto wet clay. These seals were a big deal. They were personal brands, office keys, and status symbols all in one. Historians still argue whether the more elaborate seals indicated a higher rank or simply better taste in mythology. You flip the tablet in your hand. The back is blank, a rarity. Most scribes used every surface available. In larger tablets, the writing spirals around the edge, winding like an ancient form of a Twitter thread, but with more references to oxen. Sitting back on your heels, you consider the practicalities. There were no books as we know them. Tablets were often grouped in series, with numbering etched at the end. Tablet 4 of the rituals of the moon god. Imagine misplacing one. Worse, imagine having to rewrite one. And that brings us to the real unsung heroes of the Mesopotamian library, the copyists. These weren't authors, not exactly. They weren't mere clerks either. Copyists were responsible for transcribing texts often hundreds of lines long by hand from one clay surface to another. Errors crept in, of course. A mispress of the stylus here, a dropped line there. Scholars today puzzle over inconsistent passages and missing lines, unsure whether it was a sleepy mistake or a deliberate omission. You lean against the wall, eyes half closed, and listen to the silent whisper of ancient labor. This entire system, the clay, the tags, the styluses, functioned without a single printed letter or paper page. And it worked for over 2,000 years. Not bad for a bunch of baked mud. You pause near a bench where a young apprentice is smoothing out a tablet, preparing it for reuse. That's right. Old texts were often scraped and re-wetted. Think of it as Mesopotamian recycling, but with fewer slogans and no color-coded bins. The practice wasn't without controversy. Some scholars now wonder if major literary works were lost because someone needed a scratch pad. Outside, a slow wind rustles through the reeds. The night deepens. Somewhere, a temple bell chimes again. And here you are, surrounded by millennia-old filing cabinets made of earth and water, marveling at how something so simple could be so enduring. You wander deeper into the archive compound, now past the flickering lamplight and the drying racks into a quiet chamber, known simply as the Room of Order. And that's exactly what you're here to witness. The ancient art of organizing chaos Mesopotamian style. This isn't just a pile of clay. No, this is the filing system of kings. The scent here is different. Less smoke, more cool stone and faint traces of ink. Well inkish. The clay dust lingers in the air like flour in a baker's kitchen. You brush your fingers along a low shelf where a neat stack of tablets rests, each with a smooth front face and sharp-edged sides. Unlike earlier rooms that seemed a little, let's say, haphazard, this one radiates intentionality. This is a place where knowledge was curated. You crouch before a central table. On it lies an oversized tablet, perhaps half a meter long, etched with a grid-like list. This is a catalog. Not of books per se, but of other tablets. It notes series titles, tablet numbers, and even scribal names. Imagine that ancient bureaucrats listing out all their other paperwork, cross-referencing clay, like it was a high-stakes game of Sudoku. These large tablets acted as indexes or inventories. Sometimes they included short summaries of the contents. One even has marginal notations. Tiny wedge symbols down the right edge, possibly indicating storage location or a priority level. Historians still argue whether these symbols meant shelf 3 row 2, or do not misplace under pain of crocodile-themed curse. And speaking of curses, more on that in a later section. The organizational structure varied by location. In major cities like Nineveh or Uruk, libraries grouped texts by topic: law, religion, agriculture, astronomy, and so on. Some were shelved chronologically, year by year, reign by reign. Others were arranged by author or source particularly, when the same text was copied by multiple scribes. That's right. Even back then, someone was thinking about intellectual property. You reach for a stack labeled Offerings to the Moon God. Underneath is another called Dream Interpretations, and below that, Fines for Miscounting Barley. It's like flipping through ancient Netflix categories if Netflix were entirely composed of taxation records and ritual hymns. Now you shuffle into a side alcove, a sort of clay librarian's desk. A middle-aged scribe sits cross-legged reviewing a fresh copy of a legal code. His reed stylus rests in a bowl of water beside him. He glances up with a weary smile, then continues his work. He's making sure the tablet is a faithful copy of an older one, maybe even a duplicate, made during a royal transition. New kings love to reaffirm old laws. It was like rebranding, but with more oxen references. There's a system here, rigid, deliberate. And yet you notice cracks. Literally. One tablet has a chunk missing from the corner. Another is scorched along one edge, the result of a kiln malfunction, or perhaps a nearby cooking fire gone rogue. You smile. Even ancient libraries had that one shelf where everything was slightly broken, but still too important to throw away. You glance overhead. Dangling from a ceiling beam is a faded string of rush tags, early bookmarks perhaps, or markers indicating genre. One reads roughly, "For the festival of the 7th month." Another simply says, "Laws. Broken ones." No, not laws that are broken. Laws about breaking things. Details. Across the chamber, a small doorway leads to a storage annex, a dim, cool space where retired tablets are kept. Some are wrapped in cloth. Others are sealed in clay jars for protection from moisture. Think of it as an off-site archive. You step carefully between low brick dividers and peek into a few of the jars. One holds a copy of an astrological manual. Another, a list of fish deemed appropriate for royal dinners. Important stuff, obviously. And here's the thing. It wasn't just kings and priests using these archives. Merchants, healers, even temple servants might consult specific tablets. Need to know the proper chant to remove a tooth demon. There's a tablet for that. Can't remember the right dosage of crushed carob for indigestion. There's a whole medical shelf helpfully indexed under gurgling. Yet for all their structure, these libraries weren't perfect. Sometimes tablets were misplaced. Sometimes scribes created multiple versions with slight differences. There are tablets labeled revised version or alternative ending. And yes, one fragment even seems to suggest an editorial disagreement. 2 different versions of a hymn, where the gods are ranked in completely different orders. Scholars still debate whether this was regional politics, or someone simply forgetting which god got which gift basket. You make your way back toward the center of the archive. A breeze whispers through the high windows, fluttering a woven curtain. The low hum of distant chanting carries in from a nearby temple. Time feels thick here, folded in dusty layers of effort and intention. Before you leave, you glance once more at the catalog tablet. Hundreds of titles arranged by someone who, like a sleepy librarian with a mild case of perfectionism, just wanted people to find things. And in doing so, they left behind a blueprint for memory, a roadmap for how to remember what mattered in a world without ink. You tiptoe out quietly, grateful that someone long ago took the time to stack mud and meaning side by side. You blink slowly as you step into the next chamber, narrower, dimmer, and far more cluttered than the previous one. This is not a king's archive or a temple's grand record room. This is the backstage of Mesopotamian knowledge, the unglamorous world of shelving. Or more precisely, shelving drama. Because even when your books are slabs of baked earth, someone's still going to argue about where to put them. The shelves are made of mud brick layered with wooden planks or thick reeds. You crouch to inspect the lower tier. Each cubbyhole fits 1 or 2 tablets, sometimes 3 if they're small, or belong to a single series. They're arranged flat, not vertical, stacked like sleepy pancakes. The labels, well, not always helpful. Some are marked with neat wedge signs that say things like Laws of Trade Year 8, while others simply have a doodle of a goat and a scratchy X. Is that helpful? Debatable. Historians still argue whether those goat marks denoted ownership shelf order, or just a bored scribe killing time. You ease closer to a corner where several cubbies overflow. Here lies a perfect example of Mesopotamian disorganization. Tablets clearly from different decades and maybe different cities are piled together under one cracked rush mat. One appears to be a hymn to Ishtar. Another is a receipt for a shipment of lentils. Another has a drawing of what looks like 2 angry sheep and a very alarmed man. It's unclear if that one's sacred or just comedic. A young apprentice walks by and notices your puzzled expression. He shrugs, muttering that the senior librarian changed the system again last week. Apparently, there was a heated debate over whether lunar omens belonged under astronomy or rituals. You smile. Some things never change. You peer at a small tablet propped awkwardly at the end of one shelf. It's clearly lost, its label, faded, its script smudged. No one seems to know where it belongs. You pick it up gently. It's a calendar of local festivals half erased. One entry just says second day, don't forget the fish. Not exactly the stuff of epics, but probably crucial to someone's job back then. The truth is, for all their ingenuity, Mesopotamians still faced that most timeless of archival dilemmas, running out of space. As dynasties changed, regimes shifted, and floodwaters rearranged, everything, not nailed down, archives got messy. Old systems were abandoned. Shelves were rebuilt, then rebuilt. Scribes tried to standardize things with reed labels or sealing tablets together with twine. But twine frays, and reed dries, and no one wants to be the person who redoes all the rush tags. You rub your fingers along the edge of a cubby, where a larger tablet has clearly squashed a smaller one. A familiar breakage pattern, diagonal crack, smooth, crumbling edge. This is what happens when you try to store too many hymns about grain spirits in the same shelf as war reports. Some more advanced libraries tried vertical storage. That's right, like early magazine files. Clay bins were stacked upright so the title side faced out. It looked tidy, until a minor earthquake or clumsy elbow knocked it all down. Gravity and clay. Not friends. At your feet, you find a tiny signet tablet, basically a shelf marker. It reads in careful cuneiform, "Do not move without consulting senior scribe." A stern warning surely ignored at least twice a day. You imagine a flustered assistant racing around muttering, "Where did we put the barley prayers? I swear they were right here yesterday." You follow the chaos trail to the back of the room where forgotten tablets gather like dusty outcasts. These are the maybe pile texts, with missing context, unreadable lines, or uncertain authorship. Some may be fakes. Some may be practice pieces from students. One might be the ancient equivalent of a prank email. Scholars today still try to decode a particular fragment with the phrase, The fish laughs thrice when the moon weeps. No one has any idea what that means. But it's strangely poetic. A cat, yes, even in ancient libraries, there are cat slips between the shelves, tail flicking. She pauses, then hops delicately atop a low pile and settles there, purring gently. The perfect guardian for a crumbling heap of barley tax returns. Despite all this, the system mostly worked. People found what they needed. Scribes remembered what belonged where, and when they didn't, they adapted. Sometimes tablets were copied just to keep a clean version somewhere more sensible. Other times, a text was rewritten in a different dialect for a different city and stored in both places, doubling the chance it'd survive, but also doubling the catalog headaches. You lean against a pillar and listen to the faint rustle of reeds and the scribble of stylus tips echoing from the next room. Organization in this world isn't static. It breathes. It changes. It survives through effort and error alike. In one last cubbyhole tucked behind a loose stone, you find a fragment with just a single line. It reads, "Do not forget the third jar. No context. No explanation. Just that cryptic warning." You smile, then slide the tablet gently back into place. Because some mysteries, they're better left shelved. It's morning now, or at least the Mesopotamian version of morning. The city stirs to the groggy rhythms of reed flutes, donkey carts, and the distant clang of bronze tools waking up before you do. But you lucky traveler are already inside the library, wrapped in that faintly musty comfort of baked clay and sun-warmed bricks. Today you're shadowing someone special, a royal librarian. Not quite the glasses and cardigan type, though he does wear an impressively creased linen tunic and a perpetual air of quiet panic. His job: maintaining the tablet collection of the King of Nineveh. That means everything from omens to dinner rosters to the latest rewrites of Gilgamesh. You follow him closely, watching his daily ritual unfold like a slow-motion dance in sandals. First stop, the intake shelf. Freshly written tablets are lined up here, drying under a cloth canopy. Your host squints at each one, checking for clarity, consistency, in that all-important title section. One tablet lacks a proper label. The librarian sighs and sets it aside. He'll return to it later with a muttered curse about new scribes. Next, he moves to the baking queue. These are the chosen ones, texts considered worthy of permanent firing in the kiln. He makes the decisions based on political value, religious importance, or sheer librarian instinct. It's part art, part science, and maybe part grudge. That one scribe who keeps smudging lines. Yeah, his tablet's gonna wait. As he passes down the rows of shelves, he mutters to himself, rearranging a few misplaced texts. You follow, noting how he remembers each tablet's location by heart. No barcode system, no search engine, just years of repetition, and an unsettling memory for where that dream omen tablet with the goat ended up. Today, a visiting priest arrives asking for the lunar chart from the reign of Ereshkigal. The librarian doesn't even blink. He disappears into a side room and returns with a dusty bundle wrapped in date leaf matting. He sets it down like treasure, which, to be fair, it kind of is. You lean over and see neat lines of stars, phases, and instructions for what to do if the moon turns red on a Tuesday. While the priest mutters thanks and leaves, the librarian makes a note on a slate tablet temporarily checked out. There's no due date, just a silent trust that it'll come back, hopefully before the rainy season. As the day goes on, more visitors come. A scribe wants to compare two versions of a flood myth. A merchant seeks out old grain pricing data. A nervous noble sends a servant to retrieve a contract about canal repairs. Each time, the librarian moves slowly, deliberately, selecting tablets with care. It's not just retrieval, it's stewardship. And yes, sometimes he reads for pleasure. You catch him sneaking a glance at a poetic tablet during his break, a love hymn to a goddess full of metaphors about pomegranates and moonlight. He blushes when he notices you watching. For accuracy, he mumbles. Midday heat seeps through the mud brick walls. The librarian dampens a cloth and wipes the reading table clean, then lays out a fresh batch of index slates. These are his personal logs, an evolving map of the archive's holdings. Each time a tablet moves, each time a new copy is added, he records it. There's a method to this madness. The king's advisors expect him to know what knowledge they have and where it lives. He pauses by the shelf of omen tablets. There are dozens, each one offering predictions based on stars, animals' weather, or sneezes. One reads, "If a lizard crosses the threshold at dawn, the harvest will fail." Another suggests that dreaming of frogs means marriage is imminent. He chuckles to himself. Still more reliable than court astrologers, he says. Later in the afternoon, a delivery arrives. 3 heavy tablets from a satellite archive in Asher. They're wrapped in straw, and one is already cracked. The librarian winces gently, peeling back the layers. Always with the careless couriers, he mutters. One tablet is a duplicate. He'll decide later whether to keep it or scrap it. Another is a weather log, mostly rain measurements and wind reports. You glance at a line that reads, "Wind strong enough to lift goat." That's a unit of measurement, apparently. There's a moment of chaos when an apprentice accidentally knocks over a shelf. Thankfully, the damage is minor, a chipped hymn, a smudged seal. Still, the librarian sighs deeply, rubbing his temples. He shoos the boy away and spends half an hour resorting the fallen pile. You try to help, but after misplacing a legal tablet in the agriculture section, you're gently asked to observe quietly. By late afternoon, the light has shifted, turning the walls a soft honey gold. The librarian closes up. He places cloth covers over the most delicate shelves, rolls a weighted reed curtain over the open-air window, and douses the main oil lamp, leaving only a flickering glow by the entry. He turns to you. Not everything here is perfect, he says, but it endures, and you can see it. The pride in his posture, the weariness in his eyes, the satisfaction of a day spent wrestling knowledge into some kind of order. As you step outside into the cooling air, a breeze rustling the palms. You glance back at the doorway. Inside, the last librarian of Nineveh prepares to lock up for the night just as the stars begin their ancient methodical climb across the Mesopotamian sky. The sun has dipped low over the baked rooftops of the city, casting long shadows that stretch like sleepy cats across the stone courtyards. But you're not ready to drift off just yet. Not with tonight's next sleepy curiosity awaiting you. The many, many ways to ruin a clay tablet. Because if organizing a Mesopotamian library was hard, keeping it intact was, well, let's just say the odds were not in your favor. You step into a quieter annex where tablets in various states of disrepair are laid out on mats. Some are chipped. Others are cracked down the middle like unfortunate cookies. One is so badly smudged it looks more like a dessert than a document. You crouch beside a particularly tragic case, its title still barely legible. Inventory of Royal Socks, Year 14. A true loss to civilization. You see, while clay was durable, it was also clay, soft, when wet, brittle, when dry, and entirely uncooperative. If dropped, stepped on, or left in the rain, a single sneeze from the wrong direction could knock a shelf into disaster. There's even an anecdote etched in one tablet's margin translated roughly as, "This copy ruined by dog." Scholars still debate whether that was literal or metaphorical. But if you've met ancient dogs, you'd bet on literal. You shadow an apprentice now watching as he mixes fresh clay, kneading it like dough, then flattening it into a palm-sized tablet. The scribe beside him gently sculpts wedge after wedge. But then disaster. He presses too hard. A long crack snakes through the surface like a sleepy earthquake. The apprentice winces. They try smoothing it out, but it's no good. With a sigh, the tablet is tossed into the recycle pit. A shallow bin of clay rejects waiting to be remixed and reborn. The Mesopotamians, ever practical, didn't waste their mistakes. They just ground them up and started again. Not all errors were mechanical. Sometimes scribes made errors of fact or worse, grammar. There are surviving tablets with whole lines scribbled out, others with side notes correcting earlier passages. One famously cranky tablet from Babylon even contains a furious rant from a senior scribe to his junior. You wrote harvest where you meant famine. What kind of fool cannot tell a goat from a grain sack, ouch? And yet, despite these frustrations, there was rarely punishment for mistakes. Scribes were valued even if they occasionally wrote with the flair of a sleep-deprived raccoon. A messed-up omen chart could usually be recopied. A dropped tablet could sometimes be mended. But baked tablets, now those were final. Once something went into the kiln, it was there for eternity. Or until an invading army trampled it during a siege. You pass a shelf where cracked tablets have been carefully bound in linen, entwine their broken pieces nestled like puzzle parts. These are rare texts too important to discard, even in pieces. You pick up one fragment that reads, "On the 5th day, the moon wept salt." The rest is missing. What happened on the 6th day? Who knows? Maybe the tablet broke in half just to keep us guessing. And then there are the truly strange cases. A set of tablets once found buried under an oven in a kitchen archive. Yes, those existed had melted slightly from heat. Their surfaces warped and unreadable. Another set found near the banks of the Euphrates was so waterlogged that the signs became ghostly impressions, half legible, half mud. Like the last whisper of someone who'd forgotten what they were trying to say. Occasionally, clay tablets even had deliberate errors. Some scholars believe scribes copied mistakes from previous versions to maintain textual fidelity. Others think these were traps errors, inserted intentionally to catch lazy apprentices. Imagine reading a 600-line prayer, only to find a sarcastic, "Are you still paying attention?" wedged halfway through. A classic scribe move. As you stroll through the repair area, you find a lone scribe hunched over a cracked legal tablet. He's carefully dripping water into the clay to soften a warped section, hoping to make it readable again. You ask what it is. He grunts land dispute, something about whose goat crossed the canal first. You nod solemnly. High-stakes stuff. There are debates, too, about preservation. Some tablets were wrapped in linen and sealed with wax or pitch. Others were stored in clay envelopes, literal covers that protected the inner text. To read them, you'd have to break the outer shell. It's like ancient shrink wrap, but significantly less satisfying to open. And then, oh yes, there were the duplicates, just in case. If a tablet was considered truly essential, say a royal law code or a hymn used in annual ceremonies, it might be copied 5, 10, even 20 times and distributed to libraries across the empire. Redundancy was their only real insurance policy. Because tablets fell, cracked, dissolved, or wandered off like sleepwalkers in the night. You reach the final corner of the room and find a low table holding what can only be described as the tablet graveyard. These are pieces beyond repair, nothing more than anonymous shards. A fingertip-sized wedge here, a few signs from a lost sentence there. They lie quietly unnamed, unread, but still oddly dignified. Because once they meant something. Once they were words that mattered. As the breeze kicks up and evening slips gently over the horizon, You realize the fragility of these records is part of their charm. These were never meant to last forever. But through 1,000 cracks, floods, and dog-related incidents, some of them did. And in that survival is something comforting, like the way a story lingers even when the page is gone. The sun has now vanished behind the horizon, and the soft indigo of Mesopotamian twilight drapes itself over the city like a faded curtain. Lamps are lit again, small flames flickering gently against the clay walls, and as you follow a narrow passage toward the center of this vast palace complex, something grander begins to take shape. You're entering the legendary Library of Ashurbanipal, the crown jewel of ancient archives. Imagine it as the Mesopotamian equivalent of the British Library, if the British Library had more war gods and fewer snack bars. Ashurbanipal. The last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire was a bit of a nerd. A dangerous sword-wielding nerd with a thing for lions and literary preservation. He ruled from Nineveh in the 7th century BCE, and among his many accomplishments, like ruthlessly conquering Elam, he also built what is arguably the first attempt at a comprehensive national library. You walk under a stone lintel, carved with winged bulls, and enter the vault. It's massive. The air is cool, dry, and strangely quiet, like a sacred silence hangs over every cracked tablet and dusty shelf. You feel like you should whisper. The place is bursting with clay. Literally. The collection once held over 30,000 tablets, fragments of mythology, law, medicine, astronomy, and letters from various scribes across the empire. You pass walls lined with rows upon rows of pigeonhole cubbies, each one brimming with knowledge and the occasional wayward beetle. You crouch beside a particularly dense stack labeled in neat Akkadian script, series of incantations to ward off illness, particularly that which affects the feet. You know the kind of stuff every self-respecting library should stock. You peek at another, how to make beer for offerings. Arguably more important, this was not just a king's pet project. It was a political tool, a religious treasury, a bureaucratic safeguard. Ashurbanipal collected texts from all over Mesopotamia. He sent letters, dozens of them, to officials across the empire, essentially saying, "Hi, I hear you have old books. Please send copies, or else." You stroll past a reading bench worn smooth by decades of elbows. There's a tablet sitting open to a familiar tale, the Epic of Gilgamesh written in elegant wedge lines across multiple volumes. This is one of the most complete copies ever found, thanks in part to Ashurbanipal's obsessive scribes. You run your fingers along the tablet's edge and wonder how many centuries it sat in silence before being uncovered again. But even in this great archive, things weren't perfect. You find a stack of tablets shoved into the wrong cubby, all clearly from different series. One's a farming manual, another a treatise on dream analysis, and one appears to be the lyrics to a festival song about sheep. Even the most carefully constructed libraries had their chaotic corners. You overhear a whisper, two scribes arguing. One insists that all omen texts should be moved to the eastern wing. The other believes they belong with astronomy, because the gods live in the sky, obviously. You smile. Historians still argue whether the library was ever fully organized, or if it was just perpetually mid-reorganization. Some things never change. The floors here are covered in rush mats gently worn. At your feet, a cat snoozes, tail twitching occasionally. She's curled beside a tablet describing how to ward off evil whispers carried by wind. You resist the urge to pet her. Library cats are notoriously temperamental. Moving deeper into the stacks, you pass through the royal collection. The most prized documents. One tablet catches your eye. It's inscribed in 3 languages: Babylonian, Sumerian, and Elamite. A trilingual glossary. You blink slowly. That's a Mesopotamian Rosetta Stone. Imagine the workload on that scribe. Imagine the back pain. Next to it sits a tablet that simply says, "This is a copy of a tablet found in Babylon, now stored in Nineveh." A footnote. An archival citation. Yes, the Mesopotamians were referencing each other long before academic journals existed. And of course, there's bureaucracy. Many of these tablets were state records, tax rolls, grain quotas, names of workers who did or did not show up to build temples. The dull hum of administrative memory. One tablet simply reads, 3 men brought wood. 2 were late. Harsh. Despite its fame, the library of Ashurbanipal was not immune to destruction. During the fall of Nineveh, around 612 BCE, the palace was sacked and the city burned. But in one of history's great ironic twists, the fire actually preserved many of the tablets. The heat baked them hard, locking in their texts for thousands of years. What was meant to be erased instead became immortal. Archaeologists in the 19th century unearthed these rooms, finding tablet after tablet in heaps and scatterings. It was like unearthing a time capsule, written in a language no one had spoken for millennia. They puzzled, translated, and slowly began to reconstruct the ancient voice of a kingdom. You pause in the center of the chamber, now taking it all in. The scale, the ambition, the sheer weight of memory etched into clay. This was a king who saw power not just in swords but in stories, and for all the wars he fought for, all the lions he hunted, and borders he reshaped. Ashurbanipal's most enduring legacy may just be this: a quiet room, filled with dusty shelves where people once came to read the stars, recite a hymn, or just learn how not to ruin their feet. As you drift out of the hallowed halls of Ashurbanipal's grand library, the path narrows, the clay underfoot crunches softly and a little less. Reverence hangs in the air. You're entering a different kind of chamber. Now, one filled not with sacred hymns or cosmic epics, but with curses. Yes, that's right. Because when you have a priceless collection of knowledge painstakingly etched into crumbly mud, you can't just rely on shelf tags and trust. No, you need threats. You need ancient library security systems. And in Mesopotamia, that meant magic. You duck into a quieter annex, a room that smells faintly of burnt offerings and dried figs. The walls here are lower, the shelves closer together, and you immediately notice the difference. These tablets carry warnings. Vivid, ominous, often a little dramatic. One near the entrance reads, "Whosoever removes this tablet without permission shall have his lineage erased and his crops devoured by locusts." Yikes. Another one simply says, "May Nabu strike your hands dumb." Nabu, the god of writing, didn't mess around. You mess with a library tablet and he'd allegedly turn your fingers into useless noodles. Try stealing with that. Some of the curses are quite poetic. You find a fragment that intones, "May the one who steals this text find his house flooded with frogs, and may his goats forget him." That's oddly specific. Also very sad for the goats. These weren't idle threats. In a society where literacy was power and written knowledge was sacred, tablets were semi-divine objects. To damage or steal one wasn't just petty theft. It was a spiritual offense. So these curses weren't just security systems. They were cosmic warnings. Historians still argue whether the curses were taken literally by the general populace or more as ritual formalities. Either way, the effect was clear. Don't mess with the archive, or else. You find a shelf where every tablet bears a red dot on the corner painted clay. Not blood, thankfully. This was likely a warning label. Tablets in this section contain rituals, incantations, or spells, texts considered magically active. Even now, centuries later, you can almost feel the air buzz faintly around them. Or maybe that's just the room being stuffy. You crouch beside a storage bin marked with the symbol of Pazuzu, the demon of plagues and wild winds. Not exactly the kind of branding you expect from a filing system. Inside the tablets are tightly packed, each wrapped in cloth or rush mats. The librarian you're shadowing today. A wiry, sharp-eyed man with hands permanently stained from ink and clay leans in and murmurs, "Don't open those unless you're qualified." You're not. Back by the reading bench, an apprentice is recopying a particularly long curse tablet. It begins as a mundane property listing. This field belongs to Arid Marduk, son of Iltani. But halfway through, it veers into full-blown hex. And if any person dares to remove this deed, may he eat dust for 70 days, and may his tongue turn to ash. The apprentice looks up and shrugs. "We don't really know if it works," he says. "But who wants to test it?" There's a kind of performative drama to it all. Scribes weren't just clerks. They were guardians of language, and they acted like it. By invoking gods like Enlil Nergal or Ereshkigal, they connected every tablet to a vast cosmic network of order and consequence. Theft in this context wasn't just a personal failing. It was a disruption of divine balance. Of course, not all curses were terrifying. Some were almost polite. One cracked tablet ends with, "Return this tablet in good condition, and may your fields flourish." A rare example of a carrot rather than a stick. You slide a small triangular tablet out of a basket and flip it over gently. No curse on this one, just a catalog entry. But nestled in the corner, barely visible, is a mark, a thumbprint, pressed deep into the clay before it dried. Maybe the scribes. Maybe the owners. Either way, it's an oddly human reminder that someone once held this piece of knowledge, valued it enough to mark it, and maybe worried someone else would walk off with it. As the oil lamps flicker, casting long, soft shadows across the archive walls, you reflect on the layers of intention behind every tablet. These weren't just documents, they were contracts with the cosmos, anchored by fear, faith, and a touch of theatrical flair. And you can't help but feel comforted. Because while modern libraries might use barcodes and metal detectors, the Mesopotamians had divine retribution, tongue-based misfortunes, and frogs. Lots and lots of frogs. You exit the annex, slowly brushing a bit of clay dust from your sleeve. Somewhere behind you, a curse tablet waits quietly on its shelf, daring anyone just once to test it. You wander back into the quieter halls, now stepping out of the curse-laden annex and into a gentler space where the air feels less foreboding and more curious. The light is soft again. The scribes a little less tense, and the clay tablets stacked neatly on shelves have a new kind of energy. This is where the content lives, not the threats or the tax lists, but the stuff that filled Mesopotamian minds. Myth, math, medicine. And yes, the occasional recipe. This is the heart of what was worth remembering. You settle beside a reading bench where an older scribe is gently brushing dust off a tablet. He smiles faintly and tilts it toward you. The first line reads, "The opening words of the dream of Enkidu." Your eyelids grow heavier just reading it. It's part of a series, naturally an installment in the Epic of Gilgamesh, that grand dusty tale of friendship loss and improbable monsters. These myths weren't just for entertainment. They were sacred texts used in ceremonies, schools, and likely a few long festival nights where everyone needed a good story to pass the time. You lean over a stack labeled incantations. One tablet features a charm to drive out toothaches, using what appears to be a spell involving copper wire goat fat, and a chant to Ninasina, the goddess of healing. The instructions are extremely detailed, right down to which foot to stand on while speaking the final line. You begin to wonder how anyone got better by accident. And then there's the math. You follow your host scribe to a side bench where tablets are filled with neat rows of numbers. Base, 60 calculations, geometry exercises, and something suspiciously close to algebra. One tablet even solves for the area of a field shaped like a weirdly lopsided hexagon. Good enough to confuse modern students, the scribe says, amused. Mesopotamians loved order, and nowhere did that show more than in their numbers. They measured everything: land grain, time, distance, and even beer. A particular favorite tablet nearby features a breakdown of how much beer should be allocated per worker per day, depending on job type. Spoiler alert, priests got the most. Some things never change. You spot a tablet of proverbs. These were educational tools, kind of like a Mesopotamian version of fortune cookies, but dustier and more sarcastic. One reads, "The poor man is better dead than in debt." Another, more uplifting one, "A kind word is more useful than a strong ox." Scholars still debate whether these were copied to instill values, or just because scribes enjoyed snarky wisdom. You stumble upon a strange fragment labeled "Instructions for the Lifting of Fish." It contains very little context, and despite your best efforts, you still don't know whether it's spiritual, practical, or culinary. The Mesopotamians were complex people. In one dusty corner of the archive is a set of medical tablets. These are part herbalism, part magic, and part unintentional comedy. Remedies include crushed fig bark, burnt date pits, and at least one entry suggesting a poultice of garlic and river mud to be applied while singing a hymn to Dumuzi. Whether it worked or not is, as always, up for debate. You catch sight of another apprentice, this one reciting a tablet out loud under his breath. It's a star catalog listing celestial events and what they probably meant. "If Jupiter is near the moon, the harvest will thrive," he mutters. "If Venus flickers, the king should cancel his trip." You wonder if astrologers back then ever felt overwhelmed, or just wildly powerful. Even the more mundane records can be fascinating. You open a storage bin labeled "Inventories," expecting boredom, but find a surprisingly detailed account of a ziggurat kitchen's spice stores. Sesame seeds, cumin, crushed coriander. Apparently the priests were eating better than you are. And don't forget the school tablets. Some still bear scribal exercises, practice lines, copied poems, awkward arithmetic. You spot one where the student got halfway through a multiplication problem, then clearly gave up and doodled a duck. A true icon. Your scribe guide chuckles as he hands you one final tablet to inspect a legal text about a property boundary. Nothing fancy, just a line drawn between two gardens. But at the bottom, in slightly smug wedge marks, the final sentence reads, "This record is true, and anyone who says otherwise is a liar and a fool." That's one way to end your paperwork. As you settle back into the bench, you feel a sense of strange peace. This place, this odd clay archive, preserved the daily rhythm of life. Not just kings and gods, but grocers and scribes, the toothaches and the tax bills, the dreams, the regrets, and the beer math. Each tablet is a little time capsule, and each line carved with the assumption that someone might care enough to read it again someday. Looks like they were right. As the stars settle deeper into the velvet Mesopotamian sky, the lamps are trimmed, the clay has cooled, and the scribes have mostly gone home except one. Tonight, you find yourself following someone a little different, a temple priestess. She moves quietly through the archive wrapped in linen robes that whisper with every step. Her hands are stained not just with clay, but with incense ash and something else authority. Because while most scribes were men, temple libraries held secrets only certain women were trusted to record. In Sumerian cities like Ur and Lagash, priestesses played essential roles, not just in rituals, but in maintaining temple economies, performing astronomical calculations, and yes, managing sacred records. You follow her through a corridor, lined with tablets relating to divination and offerings. She pauses now and then to adjust a shelf-wipe dust from a cracked label, or hum softly to herself, in a language even older than the bricks. You sit across from her at a reading table. She's reviewing a stack of lunar observations from the last 5 years. Neatly dated, each tablet notes the moon's color position and whether or not goats were nervous. That last part might be her personal touch, or a cultural norm. Scholars still argue about the symbolic role of goats in early omens. Her job isn't just to read the stars, it's to interpret them. Tonight she's tracking patterns ahead of a major temple festival. The high priest expects a favorable prediction or failing that a clever workaround. You watch as she copies a tablet's final line and pauses. Her stylus hovers. Then she sighs and adds a tiny correction mark in the lower left corner. Not all her work is astronomy. She pulls out another tablet, this one a ritual hymn. Her voice is low musical as she murmurs the lines, checking pronunciation. This hymn will be recited during a moonlit procession, and her responsibility is to ensure the priest chants the correct sequence. It's not just religious, it's administrative too. The wrong verse might offend a god or accidentally summon a sandstorm. Or worse, awkward silences during a feast. She sets that aside and reaches for a different pile temple inventories. The priestess is responsible for managing the distribution of offerings. Tablets show lists of sesame oil dates, incense textiles, and even gold weights. One entry reads, 4 jars of barley oil. 1 rechecked due to suspicious smell. That's the kind of honesty you want in your local religious institution. A cat wanders into the room. Yes, again. This one's sleek and black, wearing a woven collar. The priestess scratches it under the chin absent-mindedly while reviewing a receipt for sacred bread. You glance over her shoulder. Apparently there was some dispute over whether the loaves were properly shaped. A small wedge note in the margin reads, "Correct form is oval, not triangle. Triangle is for eclipse days only." You try to imagine offending a god with the wrong bread geometry. Rough. What's more surprising is her independence. She doesn't wait for a male supervisor to approve her work. These temple libraries, especially in Sumerian contexts, had matrilineal traditions. Certain women, often from elite families, were educated alongside their brothers, sometimes even better. She likely trained for years, memorizing glyphs, practicing omens, and learning chants. You spot a fragment nearby with elegant script. It's a lullaby for the moon god Nana, half hymn, half poem, with a quiet ache of longing, woven between the lines. Shine upon the cradle, O silver eye, and guard the dreams of the faithful. You blink slowly, realizing this is more than record-keeping. This is care inked into clay. She notices your gaze and gestures toward another stack. Women wrote many of these, she says softly. Healing charms, birth prayers, oaths between midwives. Not every library was about kings and conquests. Some were simply about keeping people safe, whole, and heard. She returns to her work, now copying a contract and agreement between 2 temple households about shared grain storage. It's mundane until you realize one of the parties is a woman, a landholder, writing her own name. You smile as she carves the final sign into the fresh clay. She smooths the surface, sets the tablet on a rack to dry, and douses the flame in her lamp with a soft breath. The room dims. The shelves glow faintly in the lamplight's memory. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying in a scent of rain. The stars continue their slow wheel overhead. And in this quiet chamber, a woman once trusted by gods and cities alike finishes her work for the night, leaving behind a soft echo in clay that will outlast the empire itself. The room you now enter is smaller, quieter, and packed with one particular mystery that modern readers take for granted what even counts as a book. You tiptoe between shelves, peering into low cubbies and woven baskets. Unlike the towering codices and scrolls of later civilizations, Mesopotamian books weren't, well, bookish. They were modular, non-linear, and often shaped like overcooked granola bars. You pick up a tablet, modestly sized wedge-packed on both sides. At first glance, it seems like a self-contained thought. But then you notice the last line, Tablet 2 of 6, end of section. Aha. It's part of a series. You peer at the shelf. Tablet 3 is there. Tablet 4. Gone. Misplaced. Or perhaps repurposed as a doorstop 2,000 years ago. It happens. The Mesopotamians, ever practical, didn't bind their tablets together. Instead, they grouped them by number, and sometimes even stored them inside clay jars or wrapped them in bundles with reeds. You reach for one such bundle, a rush mat tied with cord. Inside are 4 palm-sized tablets, each labeled clearly at the bottom. 1 of 4, 2 of 4, and so on. This format meant reading wasn't always linear. You'd lay out the tablets side by side like tiles in a puzzle, flipping them as needed. It sounds fun until you drop one and lose tablet 3, the part with the crucial instructions. You shiver slightly. No wonder they wrote curses. You find an odd little tablet shaped more like a triangle. It turns out to be an index. Yes, like a table of contents complete with C. Also references. One wedge symbol points you toward another tablet stored beneath the third window, or to the left of the priest's jar. Scholars still argue whether these directions were literal or metaphorical, or both. Some of the more advanced libraries even had series summaries. Imagine a spoiler-heavy back cover blurb, but in cuneiform, and involving a lot more gods and livestock. These summaries helped readers know which tablet series matched their needs, or just made it easier to find the right chapter without unbundling half the shelf. You pass a table where an apprentice is piecing together a broken series. Tablet 1 is intact. Tablet 2 is missing half its backside, and Tablet 3 seems to have been written by someone with a dramatically different wedge angle. He frowns, trying to determine if the third tablet is a continuation or an entirely different series. Different scribe, he mumbles. Maybe different city. Maybe someone had bad handwriting. A universal problem. The scribe you're shadowing today laughs softly and shows you a rarer format, a multi-column tablet. These were larger landscape-shaped pieces that divided information across parallel, vertical rows. You look at one containing lunar data. It resembles a spreadsheet. A very heavy spreadsheet. Each row marks a month, each column a celestial event. The layout is meticulous, symmetrical, precise, and just the right size to give modern accountants recurring dreams. Not every text was this tidy. Some tablets are riddled with marginal notes, corrections, and insertions. One near the corner of the room features a footnote of sorts, a smaller tablet attached with string like an addendum. Others have signs written sideways, squeezed in. Later, when the scribe realized he left out an important clause, it's like watching someone angrily try to annotate a brick. There are even books made from groups of letters. Not love letters, mind you. Administrative ones. Letters from one governor to another, all compiled in a sort of proto-epistolary archive. Some were never sent. Others were copied multiple times and distributed to different cities. One set ominously titled, Letters Regarding the Missing Builders, trails off just before the resolution. Were the builders found? Did they leave to start a rival temple? We may never know, or they just forgot to bake the final tablet. You pause at a section labeled instructional texts. These often came in the form of dialogues, teacher and student, master and apprentice arguing or discussing a concept. Like ancient podcasts, but with more passive aggression. One reads, Master, what is the number if 2 oxen pull 10 plows? Student, the number is 5. Master, no, that is incorrect. You disappoint the reed. Harsh, but effective. Another fascinating find: clay envelopes. These are thin tablets wrapped around a core tablet like protective packaging. The outer shell could carry a summary or an official seal. To read the full message, you'd have to break it open literally. There's something wonderfully dramatic about cracking a clay envelope open to see a message like, "We need more bricks. Urgently." Near the end of the room, you find a collection of lexical lists, essentially Mesopotamian dictionaries and thesauruses. These were used by students and scribes alike. Lists of signed synonyms, terms for fish names of birds, alternate spellings of the word barley, all compiled carefully over generations. You run your fingers over a list that reads like a sleepy poetry sequence. Soft mud, cold mud, mud for bricks, mud for skin. Who knew there were so many kinds of mud? As you settle into a corner near the drying racks, you realize how remarkably modern this ancient system really was. They had indexes, glossaries, series identifiers, and annotation systems. They grouped related texts. They corrected and preserved additions. It wasn't chaotic, at least not always. It was a book culture, just one made of earth and fire rather than leather and ink. And maybe, just maybe, they enjoyed that feeling you get when you crack open something familiar and settle into the shape of an old story. Even if the story is written on something that could break your foot if you drop it. By now, your footsteps feel slower, softer, your breath matching the rhythmic hush of this ancient place. You drift toward a quieter corner of the library, a section that feels less like a vault of facts and more like a maze, because what you're about to explore is the strange, tangled world of translation. It starts, of course, with the basic challenge. Mesopotamia was multilingual. Over the millennia, empires rose and fell, and with them came waves of languages: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Elamite. Some scribes learned 2, 3, even 4 tongues just to keep up. Others faked it and hoped nobody would notice. You kneel beside a clay tablet bearing 2 tightly packed columns. The left is in Sumerian, the right in Akkadian. This is a bilingual tablet, an educational tool used by scribes to study translation. The words don't always match perfectly. Some are longer, others just don't exist in both tongues. There's no clean word-for-word mapping between blessed barley field and celestially ordained grain trench. You smile. Translation is always a little wobbly. A scribe at the desk beside you is grumbling quietly to himself. He's copying a Sumerian poem into Akkadian and can't decide how to render a line that refers to the goddess who gathers the night into her sleeves. Poetic, sure, but not exactly easy to transliterate when your only available Akkadian phrase translates more like female deity possessing darkness pockets. He sighs and scribbles a note in the margin. Meaning unclear. May need new metaphor. Even 3,000 years ago, editors were a menace. The issue isn't just language. It's script. Cuneiform wasn't fixed. It evolved over centuries, changed shape across regions, and was full of shorthand. You spot one tablet where the scribe clearly ran out of room. He compressed the wedge strokes so tightly toward the end that the last few lines looked like someone stepped on a porcupine. Sometimes shorthand made things faster, but often it just caused confusion. One tablet contains an incantation for banishing spirits of illness, but the final line is written in what appears to be clerical squiggle, a fast script used by temple secretaries. Later scribes tried to decode it and added their own guesses at the bottom. One simply says, "Maybe something about goats again." You chuckle and lean in closer to another bilingual series. This one a glossary of body parts, of hand, foot, eye, liver. Very important, since Mesopotamians believed it held divine messages. But when you get to spleen, the translation column is blank. Did they not know the word? Did they not care about spleens? Or did the scribe go home early that day? Historians still argue. Misunderstandings weren't just a modern problem. Whole myths were sometimes copied from older texts and languages nobody really spoke anymore. Like trying to read Chaucer after 3 cups of warm wine. The scribe would write it out anyway, and sometimes even note their confusion. Copied as found, meaning uncertain. Best not to question. Now that's academic honesty. You stumble upon a rare gem, an Akkadian version of a Sumerian fable about a fox who outwits a lion. The fox is clever, the lion proud, and somewhere in the story there's a duck for no clear reason. The translator tried to preserve the rhythm of the original, but Akkadian doesn't lend itself well to punchy animal dialogue. The result is charming, but awkward. And then the small one of fur and trickery did elude the large one of roaring and frustration. Still, the message comes through. You glance at a clay dictionary on a nearby shelf. It lists cuneiform signs and their variants across dialects. One sign has 6 different meanings depending on placement context, and possibly the weather. The final entry just reads, "Used in songs." Translation debated. Fair. Translation wasn't just about words, it was also about context. One prayer to the moon. God's sin ends with a line, "Grant us silence, so we may hear." In Sumerian, the phrase is full of alliteration and tone. In Akkadian, it comes out flatter, more pragmatic. Stop the noise so our ears function. Accurate, perhaps, but not exactly bedtime poetry. You pause beside a jar of broken tablet fragments and find one labeled partial bilingual. One side bears the Sumerian title, the other an Akkadian summary. It's the ancient version of a movie dubbed from one language into another. Only halfway through the dubbing, the actor gave up and started mumbling. Still, someone bothered to copy it. Someone thought it was worth preserving, even in pieces. A quiet moment settles over the room. You watch as a scribe reviews a shelf of trilingual fragments. One bears notations from 3 separate hands, each trying to clarify what the previous one meant. The final note carved at the bottom in tiny script says simply, "Do your best." And isn't that what all translation comes down to? You. Step back. Clay dust on your fingers. Your mind full of half-lost phrases. Because in this room, nothing is ever fully clear. Meaning shifts. Words drift. But through all the scribal confusion, something timeless persists: the desire to connect. To carry stories across tongues. To find the shape of an old truth in a new sound. And here in this ancient echoing space of confusion and care, you realize translation isn't about perfect matches. It's about faith. A belief that someone someday will read these marks again and understand. The night has deepened. The oil lamps burn lower, and the breeze from the open courtyard carries the faint scent of dust and damp reed mats. Somewhere beyond the walls, a soft clatter echoes. Probably a donkey knocking over a jug. You ignore it. Because in this part of the archive, the stories don't need retelling. They need rescuing. Welcome to the chapter of Collapse, Floods, Fire, and Forgetting the Great Enemies of Mesopotamian Memory. You move carefully through a storage room that feels more like a triage center than a library. Here, tablets lie half covered in linen, some broken, some misshapen, all bearing the silent marks of disaster. Your guide for this segment is not a scribe, but an archivist. Someone whose job is not to write knowledge, but to preserve what's been written. He lifts a fragment gently and shows you the ripple marks across its surface. Flood, he says. Euphrates came up fast that spring. The wedge marks are distorted, smudged, as if someone tried to write underwater. You tilt the tablet slightly. It's still readable. Mostly. Barely. Water was a constant threat. Though life in Mesopotamia thrived because of rivers, those same rivers regularly tried to delete the libraries. Clay, after all, starts as mud and ends as stone. But in between, it's heartbreakingly vulnerable. Tablets stored on low shelves near outer walls were often lost to seepage floodwater or simple human negligence. Just one bad season, one forgotten window covering, and an entire corner of a library could dissolve into slush. Fire was equally dangerous, and strangely also sometimes a savior. In cities like Nineveh and Babylon, when invaders stormed in and set buildings ablaze, the intense heat fired many of the tablets like pottery, permanently hardening them. Some were cracked in the process, yes, but others emerged from the ashes practically immortal. What should have turned to ash became ironically stronger. You pause before a section of warped tablets stored in baskets labeled Fire Layer. These were excavated centuries later from charred palace ruins. Some still smell faintly of smoke, their edges curled like burnt parchment. On one, a royal letter survives. To the governor of Der send no more oxen. The roads are unsafe. You wonder if the message ever arrived. Sometimes the destruction wasn't dramatic, it was just the quiet creep of forgetting. Cities rose and fell. Dynasties changed. Scribes moved away. Temples were abandoned, and clay records were left behind. Some libraries were simply buried under centuries of dust. Others were cannibalized tablets broken down, clay reused, or buildings repurposed into kitchens or sheep pens. No divine curse needed just time doing its thing. You walk past a stack of fragments known only by their catalog numbers. Now, Tablet 763B, unknown origin. Fragment A55, possibly religious. Series 3, Chapter 4, missing opening lines. There's a sadness to these, but also a strange comfort. They didn't vanish. They waited, sometimes for thousands of years. Your archivist guide opens a sealed clay jar. Inside are tiny tablets, some no larger than a fig. These were protected, wrapped, sometimes placed with talismans or bits of cloth. Many are intact. One is a personal letter. I send this with love. I have no barley to give, but think of you at dawn. Another is a list of animals gifted to a temple, all ordinary moments suspended in time because someone thought to tuck them somewhere safe. You crouch by a broken wall, where fragments from a collapsed ceiling were found embedded in the floor. These tablets weren't destroyed by natural forces or war, but simply bad shelving. An overloaded brick support cracked, sending half a collection crashing down. You look at one of the casualties, half a medical tablet. It starts strong, confidently listing herbs and procedures, but stops mid-sentence to treat swelling of the... And that's it. No conclusion. No resolution. You can't help but feel a little itchy now. Historians still argue whether some of these losses were deliberate. In times of political upheaval, Certain texts were banned, defaced, or quietly removed, erased with water smashed into shards buried under false flooring. Whole chapters of mythology may have disappeared this way on purpose. Or perhaps someone just misplaced them during a particularly chaotic move. Your archivist shrugs as he sets aside a particularly damaged tablet. Sometimes the most important knowledge was written once, never copied, and left too close to the kitchen. He's not being funny. Kitchens and archives often shared walls. In the far corner of the room, you find a basket labeled unidentifiable. Inside are hundreds of small clay scraps. Each holds a few marks, maybe a word, maybe a name. Archaeologists painstakingly piece them together, like sleepy jigsaw puzzles, hoping one day to reunite them with their original series. Until then, they remain in limbo, half-stories, orphaned lines, pieces of poems no one can finish. But there's hope here too. You step into a brighter chamber where preservation has triumphed. These are the survivors, the texts that made it through storms and fires and forgetfulness. Some are fully intact, others pieced together from half a dozen shards. You run your fingers along the edges of a restored myth. It seems visible, but whole. And you realize something profound in Mesopotamia. The battle against loss was constant, but never hopeless. The scribes knew their world could crumble, their shelves could crack, their cities could fall. But still they wrote. Still they copied. Still they bundled and labeled and whispered to the gods to protect their words. Because they believed fiercely that memory was worth fighting for. You slip through the final hallway of the archive complex, where the air is oddly still and a bit cooler. There's a faint hum of something not quite present, almost like the walls are holding their breath. This isn't part of the ancient library anymore. This is something else entirely. You're in a place where old memory meets new hands, modern glimpses, ancient dust. Here you see them not scribes but archaeologists, time travelers with brushes instead of styluses, crouched over excavation grids rather than clay benches. You watch from the doorway as one carefully dusts around a half-buried tablet, revealing wedge marks for the first time in 3,000 years. It's delicate work. One wrong move and the whole thing crumbles. No pressure. The tools are different. Nylon brushes, metal picks, digital tablets instead of clay. But the goal is eerily familiar. Preserving information one line at a time. You kneel beside a tray, labeled OET Level 4, House 3. The pieces in it are tiny shards of tablets, no bigger than a fingernail. Someone has drawn a tentative sketch linking the pieces like a sleepy game of clay Sudoku. A post-it reads, "Possible match to priestess inventory," with a little smiley face added. Apparently, even in this meticulous world, whimsy survives. The archaeologist beside you offers a gentle nod. "This one's a shopping list," she says, brushing clay from a perfectly legible line. 3 shekels for lentils, 1 for oil, and a small jar of fish. You try not to laugh. The past has such mundane taste. They bring these tablets back to labs, you know, not to read them all. Many are too damaged, but to scan, catalog, and store them digitally. Some even use 3D modeling, photographing the tiniest indentations from a dozen angles. You imagine a tired 21st century researcher, squinting at high-res clay models, trying to decipher the 5th synonym for goat. In one corner of the room is a display of fully reassembled tablets, dozens of fragments painstakingly aligned and cemented with resin. One is clearly an omen chart, one a love poem, and another a building receipt. The odd mix sums up Mesopotamian life perfectly. Fear the moon, woo your beloved, and don't forget to invoice the temple. And then there are the misinterpretations. Early archaeologists weren't always, shall we say, correct. One famous case involved a tablet believed to be a funeral hymn. It turned out to be a beer ration log. Another supposed war chant. Actually, a recipe for sheep stew. You admire their effort, though. After all, translating a culture built on symbols, metaphors, and inconsistent spelling is a bit like trying to rebuild a sandcastle with only half the sand. Scholars still argue about 1,000 things. Whether this particular set of signs refers to divine favor or moldy grain. Whether a word means light or heat or the thing that happens when the oven is left open too long. You'd think they'd be frustrated, but most of them seem quietly delighted. They're chasing shadows, and every now and then they catch one. Some of the greatest finds come from unexpected places. Storage pits, city walls, even beneath a palace toilet. Yes, really turns out the king liked to keep important contracts near the throne. And every discovery reveals just a little more about administration, mythology, agriculture, or the deeply human urge to write things down, just in case someone might care later. You reach for a binder near the entrance. Inside are scanned images of digitized tablets. Some have been translated line by line. Others are still waiting. There's a quiet humility in the way modern scholars leave blanks where meaning hasn't yet arrived. A willingness to say, "We don't know. Not yet." That kind of honesty, like a missing tablet, leaves space for wonder. On the far wall, a screen glows softly. A virtual reconstruction of Ashurbanipal's library rotates in 3D, showing shelves and chambers based on excavation maps. You see the same rooms you just explored, but now clean, full, idealized. The scribe benches, the reed mats, the tablet bins. It's oddly moving, like watching a memory unfold in reverse. You feel the weight of time folding neatly back into itself. Beside the screen is a list of names: archaeologists, translators, scholars, and volunteers. People from across the world who've spent decades piecing together the lives of others long gone. Not to glorify them, but to understand them, to remember them. You step outside the chamber and find yourself in the open air again. Stars blanket the sky. But you feel a little lighter now, because somewhere deep in a museum or storage vault, a scribe's scratchy notes on goat behavior or fig shipment delays have survived 4,000 years, and someone is still reading them, still wondering, still smiling, because the Mesopotamians were right memory. Even the boring parts is worth saving. The courtyard is nearly silent now. Even the cats have gone off to curl under temple eaves or sneak scraps from sleepy kitchens. The clay beneath your feet is still warm from the day's sun. And above the constellations wheel in slow, majestic procession, much like they did when this whole story began. You step into the final room of the archive, a smaller, more personal space. Not an office, not a vault. It feels more like a den. Low walls, cushions along the floor, and shelves packed with worn tablets. This is the kind of room a senior scribe might have used. A place for closing ceremonies, quiet lessons, or maybe just thinking. Tonight, it's where we bring it all home. You run your fingers along the shelf edge. The tablets here aren't the grand epics or the royal decrees. They're quieter. A hymn for planting season. A letter to a wayward cousin. A scratched-out list of names, perhaps a family record. These aren't state secrets, they're echoes of daily life. You settle on a cushion and pick up one tablet worn nearly smooth. Only a few signs remain, but one line still reads clearly. Today, the rains came early. That's it. Just a timestamp on a small shift in the sky. But it feels like enough. A scribe might have written it as a footnote or a weather report or maybe as a quiet reflection. Historians still argue whether tablets like this had practical use or were just a scribe's way of taking up space. But you get the sense it mattered to someone. The sky changed and they wrote it down. You think about all the scribes who worked by flickering lamplight, reed stylus in hand, breathing warm air over cold clay just to get the wedge marks right. And not for fame, not for profit, but because the idea of forgetting was worse than the trouble of remembering. The libraries of Mesopotamia were vast and vulnerable, never truly finished. A work in progress from the moment the first tablet was pressed to the instant the last shelf crumbled. And yet something always remained. One poem, one letter, one strange line about sheep and moonlight. And someone like you finds it, brushes it off, reads it again. You lean your head back against the cool wall, eyes half-lidded. The room feels weightless now. Time unspools slowly like soft linen unraveling from a basket. The scribe's voice fades into your mind. The scratch of stylus, the smell of damp clay, the warmth of a half-told story still hovering in the air. A gentle breeze picks up outside, rustling a few old rush mats on the threshold. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimes just once. You can almost see it now. The last librarian of the night walking the shelves, checking one final tag, straightening a mat, pausing at the doorway. He looks back over the darkened room, rows and rows of ancient memory, and then slowly shuts the door behind him. The past finally allowed to rest. Now let it all slow down. Let the memory of clay soften in your thoughts. The scent of sun-baked brick and ancient dust fading gently like the end of a summer dream. The scribes have gone quiet. The styluses are still. The shelves no longer need arranging. There's nothing left to catalog tonight. Just the whisper of air over dry earth. The hush of a world long gone. A world that once cared so deeply about remembering, even the little things. Barley ledgers, dream omens, or the way the sky looked just before it rained. And here you are, all these centuries later, listening, breathing slowly, eyes fluttering closed. You can still feel the benches beneath your palms, the grain of carved brick, the flicker of flame reflected in ink-dark eyes. But now it drifts farther and farther away. The tablets return to their shelves. The reed curtain lowers. The final lamp goes out. Breathe in once more deeply. Hold it. Then let it go. Let your thoughts grow quieter than a desert night, softer than clay, slower than the stars above Babylon. You've wandered the archives. You've listened to the scribes. You've held the memory of a civilization in your hands. Now it's time to rest. May your dreams be gentle and your sleep deep as if tucked into the very shelves of Nineveh itself. Good night, traveler.